the pawn on e3 and at the same time attacks my queen on d6. So here also not the best move again. I played queen to b6, but the other option was not so much different from this, queen e7. I always like to put ranged pieces on diagonals or straight lines to important pieces. So this bishop is on an important diagonal, my queen is now on an important diagonal, this bishop is pointing to the king, and if possible another rook on that diagonal to attack the queen again. Most of the time that works. And as you have seen so far, going back to the tactics ID, I haven't always chosen the best move, but I've chosen moves which are a bit provocative, like, although it was almost a mistake, queen to d6, but the opponent here is tempted to play f5, and he did, and that was already a mistake. Now after bishop g5 I give him a chance to get maybe equality, but it's a very strange position, so he just retreats, and after now queen b6 I'm doing just fine. Okay, my opponent here played h4, and once again I had to calculate a lot of positions, and I didn't want to retreat my bishop actually, and so I didn't. I started looking for other options. Well, one other option is capturing here on f5, and that's what I did, because from here, after captures on g5, captures on g4, bishop captures on g4 and rook c6, I now have the option to put my rook on g6, threatening the pawn on g5 and possibly all the pieces behind there. So going on with my ideas of putting pieces on lines to the king or queen. Okay, my opponent here played bishop to f3, so I defend my bishop with rook to e8, and here my opponent played bishop e5. He did want to trade off my light squared bishop, and I don't know why, but it's not the best move for him. So after bishop to e5 I captured, he recaptured, and here's the reason why it wasn't the best. I have rook to g6 and this wins a pawn, at least, because pawn to f4 is an option, because then pawn to f6 will be played, and where is this bishop gonna go after that? So those aren't really options. And for example, if pawn to e4, then very easy, rook captures e5, and after that rook captures on g5, and then rook infiltration will begin, so that's no option. So what can white do here to protect the pawn? Those two pawn moves aren't good. The queen can't move to protect it, because then the pawn on e3 will be hanging, and there aren't any other options to defend the pawn. So my opponent here noticed that, and he put his king back on f2. So I captured the pawn, my opponent played rook to g1, and from here it will be a little technical. I captured on g1, which is still the best, recapture, and now pawn to f3, kicking the bishop. Well, the bishop doesn't have that many squares, so he put it on f4, where I captured it, my opponent recaptured, and now I start pushing my pawns on the queen side. There are no threats of white ever in the near future attacking my king. So it is time to make use of the pawns I have. So my opponent tries to go and push his pawns also. Well, at least I'm first, so I push b4 through, and after captures, my opponent played king to g3. Well, rook to c8, trying to push, of course, c3 through, and rook c1 was the only answer, and now I'm putting my queen back on the diagonal of the king. You'll see this idea a lot from me, because it's one of the ideas I play on to win games. So here my opponent played queen to e3, and immediately I attacked the pinned pawn with pawn to g5. My opponent moves his king, and here I capture with the pawn, which is almost as good as the slightly better option queen captures. But queen captures involves a lot more checks from white, and at this position, I just didn't want to get many checks against me. So that's why I captured with the pawn, because now after, for example, rook to g1, king to h8, and black is doing fine. Black is then even up 2 pawns, and what is white gonna do? There isn't really much. So here my opponent first played, of course, queen to e4, because the queen was attacked, and I start pushing my c pawn, and here again a slight mistake from my opponent. I won't show you. I can show you the other line for a bit, but it's not that interesting. It's just all technical, and still ending up with 2 pawns. Okay, going back to this position. Here my opponent plays queen to d3. Okay, nice tactic. Of course I can't capture, because then rook captures c8 check, and I will lose. But queen to d3 isn't the best, and that has a reason. Because now after king h8, I have opened the g file for my rook to go, and very fast after that trying to checkmate the opponent. So this is where my opponent got scared a bit, and he moved his queen to f5. Okay, attacking the rook, and of course also attacking these 2 pawns, although they are defended, but that means I can't move my queen. So I moved my rook to c7. Still, the engine didn't like this too much, but he still says I'm way better in this position than my opponent. So here my opponent finally decided to capture on c3, recaptures, and the final mistake of the game actually is here again queen d3. And you might ask why, because now white threatens to win back the pawn and be only down 2 pawns. Well, d5, c2, this was all engine generated as best for white, and black is still up 2 pawns. Okay. In this position, queen d3. Yes, attacking the pawn on c3, but from this point on I started to not care anymore about my c3 pawn. I started caring about getting a checkmate in. So the pieces here from white aren't close to the white king to help it defend. Well, my pieces aren't actually close to my king either, but that doesn't matter, for I'm the attacking player at this moment. So I played queen to e6 check. My opponent didn't want a rook infiltration, so he stayed on the h file, which might seem a little bit strange, but king h4 is still accepted by the engine as theoretical okay. And now pawn to f5, opening up the lines so you can see the checkmate coming in. And what is there my opponent can do? Well, actually queen to h6 only is already checkmate, so what is there he can do against it? He can run back, or he can go to g5, but he can't defend the h6 square. So my opponent here decided to walk on the board, walking on to g5, so rook g7 check, and now king captures f4 is forced. And here I thought a lot about the position, and of course now queen to h6 still wins the rook, which was what I played, but there is actually a checkmate in 6 in this position. It might not be that easy to spot, but the checkmate in 6 goes as follows: queen to d6 check, and of course capturing here is out of the question because that loses the queen instantly. So king to e3, now queen to h6 check, which now forces the king even further back. So, or possibly pawn to f4. Well, after pawn to f4, rook to g3 check, king to f2, queen to h2 check, king to e1, rook to g1 check, queen to f1, and queen to d2 checkmate. But at this stage I couldn't find that entire line. It was getting late. I was playing for at least 3.5 hours, so I played the easy way to win the game, and that was queen to h6 check. My opponent still didn't resign, so king to e5, I captured the rook. He pushes his pawn to d5, queen to d2, queen to b4, and after queen to e3 check, king to d6 and queen to e7, my opponent resigned in this position one move before checkmate. Okay, now I've shown you the entire game. Now I will go back to the middle game position, the position where white is to move. This position. I'll remove the lines, and now there's the question for you people on YouTube: what move would you play with white in this position? You now know that the move f5 isn't such a great move, and the position for white here isn't that great either, but what would you play with white? Is there any option, reasonable option left? Okay, thank you very much, and Goodbye.